You already know more than you think. The problem is you've never been taught how to see it, because every person you meet is leaving clues, subtle, almost invisible signals. They're not in the words. They're in the spaces between, the glance that lingers too long, the silence that lasts a second too short, the nervous laugh, the shift in tone. Nietzsche's 18 psychological truths aren't just a list. They're a new lens, a way of seeing what most people miss. But this video isn't for those skimming for quick fixes. This is a deep breakdown, split into 3 powerful sections. Each one builds on the last. Skip one, and the others lose their meaning. Stay with me until the end, and something rare will happen. You won't just understand people better. You'll see yourself in a way you never expected. From childhood, we're trained to believe in words. We listen to what people say, not realizing that language itself is a mask. Nietzsche warned us. People rarely speak from truth. They speak from survival, from ego, from fear. What someone presents to the world isn't who they are. It's who they hope will be accepted. A person who seems endlessly kind might not be kind at all. They might just be terrified of being rejected. The one who comes across as strong could be silently falling apart. The deception isn't always conscious. In fact, most of the time, they don't even realize they're doing it. They're not hiding from you. They're hiding from themselves. Nietzsche once said, "Every profound spirit needs a mask." He didn't mean it as a criticism. He meant it as a warning. Don't confuse the mask with the person, because while the mask hides, it also leaks. And that's the key. People leak the truth constantly, not in what they say, but in what they avoid. The flinch, the tension, the overly long laugh, the sudden change of topic. These are not accidents. They're openings. And here are the first of Nietzsche's truths. 1. Everyone wears a mask, not because they're fake, but because they're scared. To survive, people build versions of themselves that feel safer. But no mask is perfect. Watch closely for the discomfort. That's where the real person starts to show. 2. What someone hates in others is often what they're hiding in themselves. Nietzsche called it projection. The one who mocks arrogance might be deeply insecure. The one obsessed with honesty may be hiding a truth they can't face. So look not only at what someone praises, watch what they criticize. That's where their shadow lives. 3. Silence is louder than words. People don't just lie with speech. They avoid truth through silence. When someone gives short, rehearsed answers or dodges vulnerability, they're not protecting you. They're protecting themselves. And in that avoidance, the truth screams. You've started to see it now, the cracks in the performance. But what happens when that mask begins to slip? Nietzsche didn't see the self as something stable. He saw it as a performance, a fragile construction held together by fear and habit. When that performance is threatened, the truth leaks out, and that's where real understanding begins. 4. Excessive virtue often hides secret vanity. Be cautious of the person who constantly boasts of their purity, the one who always corrects others, always preaching. Nietzsche called this the will to power in disguise. Sometimes morality becomes a performance, not a compass, but a costume. True goodness doesn't need a stage. It acts quietly, without applause. 5. People don't lie to you first. They lie to themselves. I'm fine. I've moved on. It doesn't matter. These aren't lies to deceive you. They're lies spoken so many times they start to sound true to the one saying them. Nietzsche saw self-deception not as evil, but as defense, a way to keep going when reality is too painful. So when someone's story feels off, don't assume manipulation. Assume survival. 6. Where someone feels superior, they're usually hiding a deep inferiority. This was one of Nietzsche's clearest revelations. Superiority is often overcompensation. The person who constantly reminds you of their success, their confidence, their dominance. They're not trying to convince you. They're trying to convince themselves. Real confidence doesn't need comparison. It doesn't need a crown. It just is. This isn't about judging others. It's about seeing clearly. Reading people is not about exposing weakness. It's about understanding pain. That person who interrupts constantly, they may be terrified of being ignored. The one who posts non-stop about their happiness, that might be a cry for connection. When someone says, "I'm fine," but won't meet your eyes, don't listen to the words. Listen to their body. These insights aren't tools to manipulate. They're invitations to empathy. Because once you see through the mask, something incredible happens. You stop reacting to people's performances. You start recognizing their patterns. Nietzsche didn't want us to decode people so we could control them. He wanted us to stop being fooled, to start connecting. So if you've ever looked at someone and felt like something was off, like you were only seeing the surface, good. That instinct is right. People tell the truth constantly, not with their words, but with their slips. The flash of discomfort, the nervous laugh, the contradiction between the story and the stare. These aren't glitches, they're confessions. And once you know how to listen, the world becomes transparent. You'll start to see the wound behind the behavior, the fear behind the strength, the truth inside the performance. If this message resonates with you, if you feel the truth of it in your bones, click the subscribe button. Thank you for being here. Now the patterns are beginning to speak louder than the people themselves. Once you recognize that most of what we do is driven by fear, not desire, you start to see human behavior in a radically different way. Behind every action, there's a wound trying not to reopen. A person doesn't over-explain for no reason. They're afraid of being misunderstood. They don't dominate the conversation for fun. They fear being invisible. And the one who disappears? They're not careless. They're terrified. 7. Most actions are driven by unconscious fear. Ask yourself this. Why does someone say yes when they clearly mean no? Why do they smile when their eyes scream discomfort? Nietzsche believed that people don't act from logic. They act from fear of abandonment, humiliation, rejection, or failure. So when someone tells you what they want, ask instead, what are they afraid of losing? That's where the truth is. 8. When someone constantly criticizes others, it's not always about who they're criticizing. It's about what they're avoiding in themselves. Projection is not just a psychological term. It's a confession. The person who mocks emotion is often terrified of their own. The one who attacks someone's appearance might be at war with their own reflection. Nietzsche said judgment rarely reveals anything about the object of scorn, but always reveals something about the speaker. So the next time you hear persistent critique, don't just listen to the words. Trace them back to the source. The truth is almost always personal. 9. Guilt hides behind confidence. This one is subtle. We're taught to admire certainty, to look up to the ones who always seem composed, always in control. But watch closely. You'll notice how tightly they grip the wheel, the way they deflect when you question them, the unease just beneath the polished smile. Nietzsche observed this in leaders, in teachers, in those who need to project certainty because deep down, they're trying to silence something unresolved. Guilt, regret, unworthiness, it doesn't vanish. It hides beneath a mask of poise. So when someone feels too in control, don't be intimidated. Be curious. 10. People betray themselves through exaggeration. I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm always happy. Nothing bothers me. These aren't just bold claims. They're defenses. The ego, afraid of being exposed, shouts to drown out the quieter truth. Nietzsche believed that extremism is rarely strength. It's imbalance, overcompensation. So when someone insists too loudly, pay attention. The volume is masking the insecurity. 11. The desire to control others often hides internal chaos. If someone needs to micromanage every detail, dominate every conversation, or overplan every step, it's rarely about power. It's about fear. Nietzsche saw this clearly. When the internal world is disordered, the external world must be controlled. The stricter the person's outer shell, the more fragile their inner sense of stability. So if someone clings to control, understand, they're not trying to overpower you. They're trying to hold themselves together. Human behavior is never random. It's patterned, predictable even. Once you learn how to read it, you start to see the invisible stories. Pain wearing a costume, fear using a megaphone, shame performing confidence. The deeper you look, the more obvious it becomes. People aren't just behaving, they're broadcasting. Everything they do is a signal, not of who they are, but of what they fear, what they long for, and what they've never healed. When Nietzsche studied human nature, he wasn't trying to decode behavior. He was trying to trace it back to its source. And that source is often pain. 12. The louder the performance, the emptier the core. Look around, scroll through social media, attend a crowded event, listen to someone who's always on. The constant updates, the perfect image, the curated identity. Nietzsche didn't view this as strength. He saw it as desperation, a need to be seen, because deep down, there's a fear that without the show, no one would look. Real substance doesn't need noise. So when someone performs relentlessly, understand, they're not trying to impress you. They're trying to convince themselves they matter. But once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. 13. No one speaks purely from logic. They speak from pain. A person might say, I don't believe in love, and dress it as philosophy, but it's not a belief. It's a scar. People build their worldviews not from data, but from damage. Then they use logic to justify what pain already decided. Nietzsche knew this. Reason is often just a soldier defending emotion. So instead of debating someone's opinion, ask what broke them. That shift from confrontation to curiosity changes everything. 14. How someone responds to weakness reveals their true power. It's easy to be kind to someone who has influence, but how do they treat the ignored, the awkward, the powerless? Nietzsche believed true strength isn't shown through dominance, but through restraint. The person who mocks vulnerability is afraid of their own. The one who punishes mistakes probably wasn't allowed to make any. Real power isn't proven, it's felt. It doesn't need to crush. It can sit quietly with someone else's pain and not flinch. 15. Those who fear being forgotten often chase attention. Ever meet someone who enters a room and needs to be the center of it? Every story they tell, every outfit, every post screams, "Notice me." It looks like confidence, but Nietzsche saw the opposite. This isn't ego, it's abandonment trauma. The child who is ignored grows into the adult who needs to be constantly seen, and instead of asking directly for love, they demand it in disguise, through drama, through noise, through control. So next time someone seems like too much, don't ask, what's wrong with them? Ask, what are they afraid will happen if they're not enough? 16. People often attack those they secretly admire. One of Nietzsche's boldest truths, and one of the hardest to accept. Envy isn't always loud. Sometimes it wears the mask of criticism. The person who mocks someone's confidence may wish they had it. The one who tears down success may feel they'll never achieve it. It's easier to attack what we feel we can't become than to admit we want it. Envy is a hidden compliment, a desire we're ashamed to own. So when someone targets others with unusual intensity, look closer. They're revealing what they long for, even if they can't say it. We're not just reading people now. We're starting to see through them. And what's more, we're seeing our own reflection in the process. The things that trigger you in others, they might live inside you too. And that's Nietzsche's quiet genius. This journey doesn't just make you more observant. It makes you more honest, with others and with yourself. By now, the illusions are falling away. You've seen how the confident aren't always strong, how the critics aren't always superior, how attention seekers are often afraid of being forgotten. But now, Nietzsche leads us into even deeper territory, into the roots of who we become. Because people don't just perform, they replay. They don't act from beliefs. They act from scripts written long before they understood choice. 17. People act out their childhood, not their beliefs. You've heard it said, people don't change. But Nietzsche would say, people repeat. The adult who never listens may have been a child who was never heard. The woman who pushes everyone away might have grown up learning that closeness leads to pain. The man who overworks and never rests may have been taught that his worth depended on his usefulness. These aren't personality traits. They're survival strategies that became identities. People don't think, I choose this because it's right. They think, I do this because once it kept me safe. But safe isn't always healthy, and protection can become a prison. So if you want to understand someone, don't just ask, who are they? Ask, who did they have to be? 18. Their patterns are a confession, if you know how to listen. You don't need a therapist's office to hear someone's truth. You just need to watch them closely. The person who disappears every time a relationship gets deep isn't confused, they're scared. The one who flirts constantly but never connects isn't shallow. They're protecting something vulnerable. A person's behavior is never random. It's a language, and the pattern is the message. Nietzsche believed that most people cannot articulate their pain, but they act it out again and again. They ghost, they overwork, they chase chaos, they avoid silence. These aren't flaws, they're signals. This is how I protect myself. This is where I was hurt. This is what I don't want to feel again. Once you begin to see this, judgment fades, and in its place comes something far more powerful, understanding. You stop taking things personally. You stop assuming the worst. You realize the person who lashed out wasn't trying to hurt you. They were trying to defend themselves from an old wound. The person who kept their distance didn't reject you. They were just reenacting the only safety they've ever known. This is where Nietzsche's vision becomes radical, because it's no longer about decoding others. It's about remembering yourself. What have you repeated without realizing it? What roles were you forced to play that became your personality? What defenses do you still carry that were meant for a world that no longer exists? Everything you've seen in others, the fear, the projection, the exaggeration, the avoidance, it all lives inside you too. And that's not shameful. It's liberating. Because the more clearly you see others, the more clearly you see yourself. This entire journey has been a mirror, so pause for a moment. Reflect. Every truth we've explored wasn't just about other people. It was about you. And now, you get to choose. Not to perform, not to protect, but to see, to understand, to connect. Because once you learn to read people, truly read them, you don't just gain insight, you gain compassion. We've reached the end, but not the conclusion. Because what you've been learning isn't a script, it's a new way of seeing. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You now understand that people speak from pain, not logic, that patterns are confessions, that most behaviors are echoes of childhood, not choices made freely. And the moment you see that clearly, a strange thing happens. You stop blaming people. You start listening differently. You begin to feel not just what someone says, but what they mean. And in that gap, understanding lives. This isn't about becoming a mind reader. It's about becoming human. You've seen how people wear masks, and how those masks are not deception, they're defense. You've seen how criticism, performance, control, and even silence are all ways of saying, I'm scared to be seen. But there's one final shift left, one more level deeper. It's not just about seeing others. It's about becoming whole yourself. Because here's Nietzsche's final unspoken truth. The parts of others that trigger you, their arrogance, their silence, their constant need to be seen, those aren't just their issues, they're reflections. What bothers you in others often points to something unresolved within. And what you admire in them, it points to what you long to embody. This is the cycle. You see others, you understand them, you forgive them, and finally, you see yourself. The child who learned to perform becomes the adult who can finally be still. The person who always had to be strong learns it's safe to be vulnerable. The one who felt invisible realizes they've been visible all along, just not to themselves. That's the real journey, not from ignorance to knowledge, but from blindness to honesty. It's easy to read someone and think, I know who they are now. But Nietzsche would caution you, seeing someone clearly is not an invitation to control them. It's an opportunity to offer grace, because people don't need to be fixed. They need to be understood, and so do you. All 18 truths were never really about power. They were about perception, the ability to walk through the world with open eyes, not hardened ones, to see through the noise and recognize the signal, to realize that everyone you meet is trying, desperately sometimes, to survive with a mask they didn't choose. But now, you see it. You see the fear behind the arrogance, the longing behind the laughter, the history behind the behavior. You see people, and more importantly, you see yourself, clearly, maybe for the first time. So take a moment. Which truth hit you the hardest? Which one felt less like advice and more like a mirror? Don't let this stop here. Comment below. Share the moment you recognized a mask, either your own or someone else's. Tell the truth, not the polished version, the real one. Because the more honest we are with each other, the less we need to hide, the less we perform, the more we connect. And if this journey has helped you see people differently, if it's helped you see yourself differently, subscribe. Because this isn't the end, it's the beginning. There are more truths to uncover, more masks to gently remove, more humanity to reclaim. Let's keep going, together.